Welcome to the Charity Changemakers Podcast, the show where we dive into the journeys, challenges and successes of the leaders shaping the sector today. Each episode I'll be sitting down with the senior charity leaders to hear their stories, uncover their insights and explore what it really takes to drive change today. And if you enjoy the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like and share to help us reach as many people as possible and showcase the incredible charities that are coming on the show. So whether you're a charity professional, a trustee, thinking about joining the sector or making that next step in your career, or just passionate about making an impact, then this podcast is for you. Let's get started. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Howard Taylor today, who's the Chief Executive of Lumos. Now, Lumos are celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. So as soon as you finish the podcast, I'd encourage you to go and visit their website. You'll find some links in the show notes attached to this podcast so that you can follow those through. But there's some brilliant videos on the front page of the website talking about some of the work and impact that Lumos have had over the last 20 years, as well as resources around what the coming years are going to look like for the organisation and the work that they're seeking to do and the impact that they want to have. So please do go and take a look at Lumos after you finish the pod. Howard's had an absolutely fascinating career journey, which we're going to share with you in the conversation, and loads of insights, lots of learnings from working in the civil service and diplomatic services for the UK government in international facing roles, as well as being based overseas, to working within the UN and also being a part of one of the biggest global brands and their foundation, so the Nike Foundation. Bringing all of these learnings together, all of these experiences, all of the skill sets that he's built in all of these different places into the role that he now holds at Lumos. This is a brilliant conversation. You're really going to enjoy it. So I think that's enough from me. Let's get on and meet our changemaker. Really delighted to be joined today by Howard on the Charity Changemakers Podcast. Thank you so much for making some time for us today.
Great to be with you, Adam. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very, very welcome. No, we're really pleased to have you on the show. And look, every week I say this, but I can never do justice to an introduction. So I always like a guest just to give us a quick 1 minute, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you work, what you do.
Yeah, I'm Howard Taylor. I am the Chief Executive of Lumos Foundation. Lumos is in its 20th anniversary year, and we have been working for 20 years and have big ambition for the future of creating a world in which every child, wherever they live, gets the opportunity to grow up in a safe and loving family.
Yes, amazing. What a mission. Yeah, we're going to really enjoy finding out more about Lumos and the work that you're doing and hearing more about that as we go through the conversation. We always like to start the podcast with some quick fire questions, give the listener the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. The first quick fire for you today, Howard, is what are you reading or listening to at the moment?
Yeah, it was a thought-provoking question, actually, that one, because I listen, I think, as much do I read. I read a lot of news, and that speaks a little bit of my earlier career in government, in the diplomatic service, and having had a career that's been fairly global. So I do consume quite a lot of news, and I try and consume news from different perspectives to give me a bit more of a complete picture. And then a lot of podcasts, because I have to read a lot for work, and so I like to listen rather than read more and more, and a whole bunch of podcasts, News Agents, Americast, Rest is Entertainment, Radical. I do consume quite a lot of podcasts and sometimes wonder, what did I do? What did I read? What did I listen to? And we didn't have all these hundreds and thousands of podcasts that are on offer today.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the rise of the podcast is incredible, isn't it? Over the last few years, and like you say, just how people consume that. Commuting, going to sleep, running in the gym. All these different places that people tell me that they're listening to podcasts. So
yeah, it's exactly that. It's the fact we can do it when we can consume it, listen to it when we want. What I love about podcasts is, there's the consumption, as I said, of sort of news and facts and things that are happening. But it's that detail of people who really know what's going on behind the scenes and that unpacking, so you understand not just what has happened, but a bit more of how and why, and that sort of exploration I really enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more than just the headline, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. Howard, I think I've grown to love this question through the podcast over this series. But what is a quality that you had as a child that you still have today as an adult?
Yeah, I'd say optimism, and I hope that's not naive optimism, and that maybe goes in different directions, but I think it's really an optimism for what is possible, and I think I had it as a child, and I think of optimism, of positivity, and a sense that, and my career, over 20 or 30 years has sort of borne this out, that most things are soluble, most challenges can be navigated, most hurdles can be jumped over. So a sense of optimism when we look at, many of the issues facing humanity, whether it's here in the UK or more globally, sense of optimism. But that's, as I say, it's not a naive optimism. It's an optimism coupled with experience and a bit of, I think, healthy dose of pragmatism, but a sense that change, positive impact for humanity in a lot of the issues we face is possible.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I really like that answer. I think we've had lots of answers from chief executives and directors through this series around sort of curiosity and asking questions, but actually that angle of optimism, I think, might be the first time we've sort of had that. But I say it's a bit of a common theme across people that work within the sector around, you say, wanting to bring that, not from a point of naivety, but that positive change and seeing through. I guess last week, David Knott talking about local communities and the importance of, community action and change. So that's really helpful. Howard, I don't know how often these come along for you, but if you get a free day, how would you choose to spend it?
If I get a free day, that would be lovely.
Yes.
They do come along occasionally. I think sometimes you actually have to manufacture them and make sure you have some time out and some free days.
Yeah.
I think a variety of things. So, I do like to exercise as and when I can. We already talked about reading and listening, but probably, going a little bit deeper, indulging a bit more, maybe getting to the sort of the back end of the newspapers and the lifestyle, the culture, the arts, the sports and stuff. You don't necessarily have time to sort of read in full on a regular day. So exercise, a bit of reading, a bit of listening, possibly watching a bit of sport depending on the day of the week, and then time with family and friends.
Yes, yeah, perfect. No, that's great. Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us in this first instance. It's good to get to know an individual a little bit better. And actually, this is the first time that we've chatted, and I really enjoy these. I think I've said this before on some of the podcasts. I really enjoy these types of conversations where I don't actually know the guest that well, because it's a really good opportunity to delve a little bit deeper and to ask those kind of questions. And I guess we're all learning as we go. I feel a little bit like the listener, so hopefully get the right questions as we go through. But we always start the podcast off by asking this. Well, I always think it's quite a big question about, how did you end up, or how did you get into the charity sector? We reflect quite often that, nobody set out, or at least very, very few people set out, with that career ambition of, I'm going to be the chief executive of a foundation by X time in my career. So, how did that, that move into the charity sector, or that learning of the charity sector come about for yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think you're right in the sort of setup to the question that, if I go back to myself when I was a schoolboy or even at university, I don't think I necessarily thought I'd end up where I am today. So I think that the first aha is, no, this isn't the culmination of some grand plan that I had when I was an adolescent or in my 20s. But here we are. I grew up in a family that was quite globally minded and quite focused. A lot of the dinner table conversation was around issues about rights and social justice and, making the world a better place. So I grew up in that kind of environment with a lot of those conversations going on. I'll be honest, I don't think I appreciated at the time that the extent to which that was probably informing and shaping who I became. I had an opportunity then between finishing school and starting university to go to India and to volunteer in a school in South India. And that was a really, if you think of some of the moments along your pathway, which are sort of this way or that way, pivot moments, that was definitely one of them. I was, prior to that, I had applied to do law degree. I still could have done, but actually that was the first time I'd been to a country like India, a country with, a very different population, a very different culture, very different economic environment, etc. And working in the school there and having the ability to travel around India and just soaking it up and getting a sense of, a country so different to where I had grown up in the UK. And that really, I think, sort of, changed my heart and my intent and really ignited a passion to end up working as I did in international development. And so I changed my degree pathway and, I went and did my first degree. I ended up doing a master's and a PhD. I wouldn't necessarily say that everyone should necessarily go down that pathway. But I was really seized by some of those issues about social economic development, how it happens and the role of different countries, different actors, whether it's government or faith groups or civil society, multilateral organizations. And began my career, my first, coming out of studies a few years later, I began my career in what was the UK Department for International Development. It was a government department created by the Blair administration. So when Tony Blair became Prime Minister in 1997, that was the beginning of the journey, and there were other sort of moments along the way. But that's really how I started, from the sort of family background, the conversations that we had at home, the opportunity I had to travel and see countries very different to our own, and that sort of changed my direction for studies, which then led to setting me off on this career trajectory.
Yeah. I found it fascinating. I found it really interesting. I mean, it particularly the impact that India can have on someone. I went to India to teach English as a foreign language in my gap year, finishing A levels, and came back from sort of 9 months overseas, and said to my parents, "Blimey, I'm cancelling my university place. I'm going to go do something. I need to do something completely different." We had other guests on the show that have talked about either experiences in Africa or India that are, in that. I guess formative teenage years that just suddenly give you a bigger impression of the world, of the globe, and I guess this probably ties into the optimism that you were talking about wanting to make a positive change that changes a trajectory. And ends up then working in government. So talk to us, because I guess for a lot of us here, I guess listeners, that's going to feel like quite an alien environment, and maybe different to what of clearly the charity sector and where you are now. I guess we'll explore that through the conversation. But talk to us a little bit about those, I guess, early years of your career. Working in that space.
Well, first of all, I struggled to actually get into government. I applied once or twice to go in those days. You could go in as a sort of technical expert, the sort of professional stream, experts in health or education or water and sanitation, those sorts of issues, or there was a managerial track. And I tried, maybe I was naive in a different sense then, I tried on the back of my academic credentials and some of the other volunteering I had done to get in as a professional with expertise, particularly in the sort of health, population, economic sort of realms, if you like. And I tried and failed a couple of times, and then tried the managerial track, and I got into, as I say, this newly created Department for International Development on the managerial track. And I share that because I think there's a lesson in there: don't give up. If you've really set your heart and passion on something, and you think that's where you're meant to be, if you don't always get it at the first, you don't always jump the first hurdle. But B, unbeknownst to me, that really changed the nature of my career path within government, because had I gone in on a professional track, I would have evolved and grown, I hope, within that professional discipline. But because I went in on a managerial track, I was exposed to lots of different types of work quite quickly. So in my first few years, I did policy work, I did programmatic work, I had the opportunity to work in the office of the Secretary of State at the time. So got very different perspectives on different bits of the business. And then through what became a 14, 15-year career, all focused on foreign policy and international development, largely with the Department for International Development, but also working for some other bits of the UK government, and having spells in India and then in Ethiopia. It was a very varied experience. And I guess that's one of the lessons I would pull out from that. And I wouldn't have known this had I not gone into government, into the civil service, into the diplomatic service as I did, that, it's very, very varied. The things you can be working on, whether that's an issue or a geography or a type of the work, whether it's policy or financial or programmatic or marketing and communication, so many different aspects to all of that work. And also just to reflect from where we are today, and we may come onto this in conversation, but looking back at where we were in the late 90s, at that time, what became the Millennium Development Goals, that set of global goals that was agreed in the year 2000, they were in the process of being agreed as a set of, if you like, North Star or North Stars for international development. And there was a spirit of global cooperation and multilateralism, which isn't quite the same today as it was, 28 years ago. But it was a fascinating time, an exciting time. And we had a government here that was politically committed, that was, financially committed to growing the aid program, and had created this separate government department. So it was a very exciting place to begin my journey, which then took me, as I've alluded, to different roles within London, but also time in India and then time in Ethiopia as well.
Yeah. I'm always really pleased when we get a civil servant apply with a civil service background or diplomatic background, because for exactly that reason, the variety of stuff that you get exposed to that is so relevant in crossover to the charity sector, whether that's, whether it's thinking around finance or income generation or that commercial space to HR to marketing, all of that. You get, and because all of these different tracks and people seem to move around and get exposure to a whole bunch of different things, I think you get a real strength of candidate that actually sees come through. Where sometimes it can be a bit of a nervousness to go, oh blimey, this is feels very different to what they might be applying for or into charity sector, but actually just a wealth of skills, experience, and transfer, that are all transferable.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then, my career evolution, which I said, I think earlier on, it wasn't sort of planned out from when I was younger. I was able to seize opportunities which came my way. I was in Ethiopia. I was the country director of the UK government's development program in Ethiopia, which was a fascinating place to live and work. And you could see tangible progress being made in health and education and rolling out of services and governance, climate agenda, social protection. It was a huge agenda. Yes. But you could see and feel sort of tangible progress being made. And I had a great team of people there, largely Ethiopian staff, but also a bunch of expatriate staff as well. And really part actually not just of the development effort from the UK government, but in those days, and I'm sure it's still the case, that sort of joined up, development, defense, diplomacy, because you're looking at Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa. It's a somewhat unstable region. And so, the UK government had and still has, I imagine, multiple interests there, which go beyond just the development about trade and defense and diplomacy, etc. So it was a fascinating place to live and work. I was minding my own business there, doing that role, enjoying it, starting to have conversations about moving back to London, what my next role would be. And then somewhat out of the blue, an opportunity came for me to move across to the US West Coast and run the Nike Foundation. Yeah. And that was, I went for that fairly immediately when it was offered. I can unpick the story, but I think what's maybe more interesting is why I did that rather than the fact I did it. Yeah. And it was really having worked for 15 years by then, both in HQ on global issues, supporting secretaries of state in India, in Africa, etc., with the toolkit of a G7 government. So you think of the toolkit that a G7 government has, the political clout and connections, or political capital and connections, the financial heft, if you like, of the aid program, and the technical expertise, and some of those things, that toolbox. What really fascinated me about the opportunity to go and work at the Nike Foundation was a particular initiative they had called Girl Effect, which I'm happy to say is still up and running. It's now a separate entity running out of Nairobi, but with a global presence. And it was using that toolkit that Nike is so well known for, which is brand marketing and communications, but using those assets, so a different toolbox, if you like, but using that for social impact. And that was what was really attracted me, because having worked on these sort of systemic sectoral change in certain countries, as I said, in education, health, etc., where you're really investing over many years of what is systemic, large-scale change to improve access and quality, etc. We had seen where certain groups of people were not able to access it, even when services were in place, whether that was healthcare or education. Certain groups of society were not able to access those. And one of the particularly disadvantaged groups was adolescent girls, who in many countries, in many cultures, when they reached a certain age, usually around puberty, would then stop accessing or not be able, or culturally it wasn't, they wouldn't access some of those things. And so the Girl Effect that Nike had launched some years before was an initiative really about empowering adolescent girls and changing the conversation around them to enable them to take up those services when they were being provided. So that's why I made that move, because I was curious and excited to work with quite a different toolkit from a large US global corporate and brand.
I'm quite interested in that transition, and I guess the outcomes that come from it, or I guess this, I don't know, job satisfaction, whether that's the right way of putting that in the, because I guess there's significant differences between working in government and then working in a corporate foundation. But obviously, clearly, with that driver for yourself of wanting to see change in places around the world with a global impact, was it sort of, I guess, that wanting to go deeper and by making that move into the charity sector, and has it met those I guess those needs within you, or because things, I guess, move at a different pace compared to government?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a leap of faith, but obviously it was a sort of calculated sort of leap of faith. And it really was, from what was an established career trajectory. I was doing fine, I think I was making a contribution and helping the UK government contribute to make a difference globally, to something which, and I think honestly, I think it did surprise some of my colleagues, some of my family and friends. It was seen as, it wasn't the obvious career move, but I've explained why I did it. But then, yes, it was a completely different environment. And something you said earlier about people who come through government with a civil service, diplomatic background, and the kind of training I hadn't appreciated, I think, until I went from the UK government to work for a US corporation. I hadn't really appreciated the skill set, the experience that I had, the very deliberate investment that I'd had in me as a trainee when I was younger, as a manager, as a leader, as I became more senior in government. I hadn't really appreciated just how much I had either absorbed tacitly as I'd gone along or been deliberately invested in. And that toolkit really stands you stands you in quite good stead when I moved across to a very different sector. But of course, it was a completely different environment. And there were things that I really enjoyed about that environment. And then there were some things which I didn't ever think I would miss about government and civil service, which I really did.
Sure.
I mean, some of these things are probably a little more obvious. I mean, the pace and the risk appetite and how that informs the culture, I found quite different from, moving from government to a US corporate foundation. By that, I mean, the pace was often a lot faster. Decisions were made a lot more quickly. There wasn't the same need of consultation and approvals that you have in government, for all good reasons, in a government system where you're using taxpayers' money. But linked to that, a different appetite for risk, a different appetite for creativity, innovation, experimentation. But linked to that wasn't just a sort of move fast and take risks. It was move fast, take risks, learn. And you might summarize that almost as act, learn, act, move quickly, etc. And I think what was really interesting, Adam, was, that was a bit of an ethos of Nike as a corporation. And it was how that applies in the social space when you're not just, I say not just, but you're not making sort of sports apparel or sneakers, trainers. You're actually working on social impact, which influences and impact on people's lives. So, how you apply a sort of corporate culture and DNA to a foundation doing global social impact work, and what's appropriate in terms of pace and partnership and risk and failure and learning and action and delivery. I really enjoyed all of that. I really enjoyed applying what I had known into that new environment. And I certainly evolved as an individual and as a leader in that space, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's partly down, like you say, down to the culture of the corporation, isn't it? That it's got that oversight of the foundation and what it's trying to deliver in that act, learn fast, and being able to have the resources behind, I guess, even from a financial point of view, to be able to invest and to support in that way. But there's something about that culture that I guess is really important for non-profit organisations of any size to sort of embed, I guess, that type of culture and approach as and where they can. And that transition, I think that transition, I guess I'm interested as to whether there was things that, you say you were learning fast, and was there people that came alongside you, I don't know, mentors or coaches, or was there training, qualification, learning that you did to help you make that transition, or was it literally just, learning on your feet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a variety of things. I already had a coach, an executive coach who I'd started working with through a leadership program I had done as part of the civil service. And he then stayed with me as I moved across to Nike. So he knew me, understood me, etc. So I kept him as an executive coach. I also had, a great boss who is the president of the Nike Foundation, a woman called Maria, who had already achieved extraordinary things both corporately, but then moved across into the foundation. It was really a large part of what became creating the Girl Effect, this big initiative. And working with someone who had grown up in a different commercial environment, who thought differently, very creatively, very, very visionary. So I think the combination of that, but also support, a measure of support and challenge, having an executive coach, and then just having a great team. I mean, I have been privileged, I would say, in all the jobs I've done, whether it's been in government, when I went across to Nike. We can talk later about things I've done since then and what I'm doing now. But in each place, there have been the most extraordinary people, the most extraordinary talented people who've also been very generous with their support. But what's also always interesting is, what people say sometimes with hindsight. And I remember towards the end of my time with government in Ethiopia, one of my colleagues said to me, she was reflecting on when I had arrived, and she said, you were like a rabbit in the headlights for the first 6 months,
Yeah,
which wasn't feedback I'd been given at the time, but I'm sure was true.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But I suppose in any new setting, you never know, do you, when you walk into a new role, let alone a new sector or a different country, like walking into ETH, you never really know what you're walking into, is there? There is that sense of listening and learning, and sometimes you end up what might feel a little bit out of your depth, but clearly there's that ability to learn and to move forward and to get going. So you mentioned there about things that came next. What came next then after the Nike Foundation?
Yeah, so 2 or 3 years in, we had decided that the Girl Effect, this particular initiative the foundation was running globally, had outgrown what we could actually do sensibly from a US corporate foundation, because the ambition for the work was growing, and we just needed a bit more, some different freedoms, if you like, than we were able to do from within the structures of it. It was a separate entity to the corporation legally, but obviously there was a close affiliation, and we just realized that, we had incubated and grown this thing to a certain place. It needed to almost be set free. And maybe ironically, it was an initiative about adolescent girls. And we joked at the time around the Girl Effect itself as an initiative had become an adolescent and needed to sort of be set free. And so we chose to spin it out and created a separate entity that was initially headquartered in London. And now, as I mentioned earlier, is headquartered in Nairobi. And so I went with that for the first year or two. We brought in a new CEO. To run that. And so a couple of years later, I stepped away from Girl Effect, took some time out. And then the next move I made, and by the way, I think it's important just to note in passing here, that there's a sort of family dimension to this of a very supportive and understanding wife and children who have moved with me to Asia and back, and then in Africa, the west coast of the US. Then we moved to London, and we're not expecting to go back to the US, but I was approached about a role leading a UN public-private partnership addressing violence against children. As I say, we had just, we had moved back from the US a couple of years prior to that. I wasn't planning to move back to the US this time to the East Coast, based out of New York. But it was an issue that by this point, it was interesting for me, having worked, in government on sort of broad cohort of demographics from adults to children. At Nike, the Girl Effect work particularly focused on adolescent girls, and then this opportunity came up to work on children more broadly as a global cohort, and those who experience violence, which sadly is 1 in 2 children globally every year, violence and abuse of some sort in different settings. And so it was enticing to me to take what I had learned and known in my networks through government, those that I had developed and the skills, experience and networks through working at Nike, and take that combination into a UN setting with, again, another different toolkit. You're not government, you're not a corporate, you're a multilateral, but you have access to governments at the highest level, but also working in a very deliberate partnership model. So running a global team of about 30 people, but supporting, as we were eventually, a platform for over 800 organizations, governments, corporates, faith groups, CSOs, academics, etc., all working as really a global movement tackling violence against children.
Yes, yeah. And was that then a result, then a move back up in the family and move back to New York, then to the States?
We did. We started out just in Washington, D.C., and then after a year or so, we moved up to New York. In fact, just over the water in New Jersey, just outside New York. And then during that time was just pre-COVID pandemic, and then and it was a fascinating time to be living in the US. Just as a sort of sidebar, I think 2020, when we had the pandemic, we had the first round of Donald Trump v. Joe Biden. Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, and all these things unfolding, simultaneously. It was an extraordinary time to be living and working in America, both professionally but as a family, but also to be doing, global work based out of the US at that time was extraordinary, and new challenges and new learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to just skip over the work with the UN, but always conscious of time and wanting to chat about obviously current role and what that looks like, and because it's just coming up a year that you've been with Lumos, is that right?
Yes, it's about almost 11 months to the day, I think, isn't it?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. And obviously exciting times at Lumos, because obviously it's anniversary year, celebrating 20 years. And we'll put some links actually in the show notes so people can come through. But there's some lovely videos on the front page of the Lumos website for years, and the work that you're doing, and the and output that's happening. But yeah, so talk to us a little bit about about Lumos, about how the opportunity came about, and that, I guess, that transition again, and what I presume was another family move.
It was another family move. We moved back from New York to London in summer 24. And late summer, early September, I had a call about an opportunity at Lumos. I had known Lumos before. I'd worked with them a bit when I was in government, when I was at Nike. So I'd known of Lumos. I hadn't really closely tracked what the organization was up to, where it had gone, what was going on, etc. And got a call. And really, when I got that call, the sort of criteria I was thinking about, what did I want to do next, was really around wanting to find an organization, where I would have alignment around the mission of the organization. Obviously, that's important. Also about ambition. Did the organization and those who are running it, whether executives or governing it, did they have an ambition that was significant? And what moment was the organization in? So that combination of alignment with mission, sense of ambition. What is the moment the organization is in? And could I, with my skills, experience, network, etc., make a contribution? Was I the right person to make a contribution, taking those other factors into account? And, those things all lined up very quickly for me. And I got into conversation with the recruiter and then with folks at Lumos. And started 11 months ago, November 24. And, feel very privileged to have joined an organization at what is an exciting time for Lumos. But I don't want to say that without acknowledging it's a turbulent and somewhat challenging time for everybody, I think, in the social impact space, whether in the UK or globally. And I think, part of what we're doing right now is navigating that and figuring out where we go next and how we go there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think I'd be interested to explore. I recognise, you're coming up 12 months in post, but some of the differences, or if there are differences, between working within a UK-based charitable organisation compared to a non-profit in the States, and I guess some of the opportunities or challenges or differences, things that you've picked up between working, in senior roles, either side of the water.
Yeah, I think, and I've had again, by accident rather than design, I've now, had the privilege of working in government. I've worked in a US corporate. I've worked in the UN, in the multilateral system, and now obviously in the non-profit space in the UK. I think, and each of those cultures is very different. It's different in terms of size and scale and bureaucracy and admin and speed and risk appetite and all of those things. But I think specifically from the US and the UK, I think a couple of things is, one is I feel there is a more progressive conversation in the US around the role of non-profits and the sort of work that they do. And I say that because I think that also links to some of the appetite for funding, particularly private funding, particularly philanthropic funding in the US of the work that non-profits do, both non-profits working in the US and those who are also working globally. I think there's a sense of the complexity of the work that non-profits do, and I think that is understood differently in America to maybe how it is in the UK. I'm not saying it's not understood in the UK. I just think there's a different culture in the US of that understanding of the scale, the complexity of what it takes for non-profits to achieve their mission. Again, whether that's in America or globally, but also the financing that people commit in America. And I think you see that across American society, actually. It's a different culture of giving and the scale of that giving. And that also maybe sort of complements a little bit some of that understanding of the scale and complexity of the missions that non-profits are trying to deliver.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I always find it fascinating. I've got a bit of a fundraising background and limited, I guess, what we did in North America, but it was very much based around corporate fundraising. But it always felt very different walking into a corporate office in New York or Houston, where we did a lot of our fundraising for the organisation I work for, compared to walking into head offices I was walking into in across Europe or Asia. Whereas actually you could get to the ask in America a lot quicker, and people prepared to open the checkbook. It was like you say, just a very different appetite to giving.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think and then how you position the ask and how you position your organisation and what it is you do. And again, look, I'm grossly oversimplifying, because there's plenty of organisations in the UK doing fantastic work, raising extraordinary sums of money in a difficult economic climate, and all credit to them, and I hope they continue to do so to deliver the work they do. But my sense is in the US, you focus, it depends which donors, of course, but I'm thinking of some of those, some of those at the top end who are able to give significant sums of money, maybe more inclined to give it with less restrictions on their money and have faith and confidence and trust in you as a leader or you as an organization. And therefore, they're buying into not just you and the organization, they're buying into the idea, and usually, a big idea. And so there's a sense of selling, I think, positivity and ambition and impact at scale, but with a credible plan that sits underneath of how you're going to do that. And I think that in other parts of the world, so I'm not just talking about the UK, sometimes there can be more a focus on the problem and attracting money almost to fix the symptoms of a problem. Whereas I think in America, you more often find yourself pitching about how you're going to tackle the underlying causes and address the systemic failures that are so often responsible for some of the social impact failures that we see.
Yeah. But I guess there's learnings within that, isn't there, and things that you can transfer into Lumos, and I guess the way in which you lead organisation based here in the UK, but clearly, obviously working for a global impact as well. So so tell us a little bit more about Lumos, the work that you do, and the work that you're supporting around the world.
Yeah, so Lumos was established 20 years ago. So again, I've arrived at a time where we just coincidentally are having our 20th anniversary year. And our vision is a world in which every child gets to grow up in a family with loving support and community support around them. And our mission about how we go about that is transforming care systems. And what's really interesting, Adam, is over recent years, we began, if you go back 20 years, it was a lot of conversation about orphanages. It was a lot of conversation in the jargon about deinstitutionalization, getting kids out of orphanages, because all the evidence base from all over the world is unambiguous that a child is better growing up in a family environment, whether that's their biological family or kinship, whether it's foster, adoption, all of those are better than a child growing up in an institution. But over the years, and our most recent strategy, which I inherited when I arrived, very well put together by my predecessor and the team, is moving us more upstream. So we still care and work very much on that care reform, that as I said in the jargon, the deinstitutionalization of children, getting them out of institutions and reunited with their family or other kind of family alternative care. There are 5 or 6 million children globally who do still live in institutions. Where those institutions, as they are in some countries, still called orphanages, 80% of those children have living biological parents. So most of the children in orphanages are not orphans in the actual definition of the word. So we still care about that. We still work on that. But our work has taken us more upstream to work increasingly around preventing the breakdown of families and the separation of children in the first place. And of course, you'd immediately see, well, yes, that's better for children, it's better for families, it's actually better economically. So the ROI in terms of the sort of investments that need to be made are better if you can keep families together in the first place. And what's really interesting is that's then taken us into a multi-sectoral approach, because you end up, looking at researching the issues, the drivers of family breakdown and separation. You quite quickly get to, yes, poverty, but also disability, inclusive education, the need for caregiver support, positive parenting, violence against children, etc. So as Lumos, we have to be careful that we don't have mission creep. We're not here to do all of those things, but we have to be sufficiently aware of them and work with the communities of practice, with the practitioners who work on those issues. And our model is very much predicated on working with and through governments. And I would say, if I was to boil right down to what we do into 2 or 3 things, we're in the business of systems change, of systems transformation. We do that by working with and alongside governments. We bring in the voices and the insights and the expertise of those with lived experience of care and the care reform journey. And, we are essentially an enabler and I think a catalyzer and an enabler of that work in multiple countries.
Yeah, and I guess from what we've heard of your career journey, a lovely blend of your different experiences and backgrounds, and work obviously within foundations and obviously within government, UN, clearly senior stakeholder engagement, trying to bring lots of moving parts together. A lovely blend of all of those different areas into this role for you personally.
It is, yeah. And again, that's sort of by accident rather than design. Sure. Having spent the last 10 years or so of my career focusing increasingly on, children as a demographic, whether it was adolescent girls at Nike, children writ large at the UN, it seemed a sort of natural progression. But you're right, really pulling on on those different aspects. And the stakeholders we have to work with are government, but it are also multilaterals in the UN and beyond, and corporates and faith groups and local and global NGOs as well. So there's a mix of those organizations. And I guess going back to what I talked about toolkits earlier on, I guess it's another different toolkit to those that I've worked with before, but very much informed by and drawing on those skills, networks and experience I've gained over the 20 plus years.
Yeah. And I guess as you've reflected on those toolkits, it's all with, there's the same driver and motivation, isn't there? Like you say, there's a different set of tools to get in there, but the driver is about being able to make positive change in communities in and around the world, which has been fascinating to hear. And I guess we're always interested on the podcast when we speak to people and they reflect on their careers and where they've got to date. If you could go back and give yourself some career advice, probably just got back on the plane from India and thinking about what those next steps were, with what you know now, is there a piece of advice or an insight that you give your younger self heading off on that journey into, well, I guess the unknown at that point?
Yeah, there is. Before I answer that, I'm just going to maybe tag on something to my previous answer, which is really just about where we go next. Just because of, this happens to be our 20th anniversary year, we were therefore sort of reflecting, looking back, learning on the experience and the 280,000 children that we have, enabled to be reunited with family-based care over the last 20 years. Our ambition for the next chapter is to go further and faster, is to do it in different ways. And we're very cognizant of this moment of sort of, global turmoil, whether that's geopolitical, security, economic and otherwise, and how those impacts are playing out in the countries where we work, and really considering models how we work with and through partners in countries where there are still large numbers of children in institutions and or a large number of children at risk of family breakdown and separation. So we are developing some ambitious plans for what will essentially be our next 10 years, and thinking about the early years, the first part of that 10 years, and also just what that looks like, Adam, in an environment where children, if you think about Lumos 20 years ago, or children 20 years ago when we started, and children now, and how different, whether it's economically, technologically, what's going on with the climate, etc. There are so many changes that children are experiencing, so childhood changing as well, and we have to be cognizant of that when we think about how do we work, how we move upstream to work more on prevention, prioritizing localization, ownership, etc. I think we're at a time of paradigm change, frankly, in international development and in social impact work. And it's both exciting and slightly daunting and challenging to be in that moment, because I feel, and talking to my peers across other organizations in the UK and globally, everyone is in the same moment, everyone is in the same mindset, everyone is figuring out what is all the change that is happening very fast around us. How can we influence that? But what does it mean for our business models, our operating models, our funding? And ultimately, what does it mean for delivering our mission for children? So I just wanted to say that piece. Now, your question about...
Well, if I just jump on there, Howard, because we'll have listeners who, maybe are coming across the Lumos Foundation for the first time, or, feeling inspired by what you've just shared. For individuals that want to find out more, or get involved, or think about ways in which they can help. What should that listener do right now? Yeah,
take a look at the notes or the links you're going to put in the podcast, hopefully. Yeah. Otherwise, go to our website, wearelumos.org, and you can see a bunch of information there. You can also sign up for a newsletter, which we send out on a fairly regular basis, which will keep you informed of what's going on and how you can engage and support the work we do.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, those videos on the front of your website at the moment are definitely worth going away and having a watch and a read through for sure. So no, that's brilliant. And circling back then, piece of career advice that you give your younger self, if you were 8, it'd be lovely, wouldn't it, to be able to circle back and go and have that conversation. But what insight or thing would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, I think I'll refer back to something I said earlier, which is when we talked about the sort of different mentality when we're talking about my transition from government to US corporate foundation, which is that act, learn, act mentality. And I might add something in there to say act, learn, adjust, act. And so the advice I would give to myself, because I wouldn't, if you told me that when I was a teenager, I'd say, what on earth do you mean? Act, learn, adjust, act. I'd probably be rude. So the advice I'd give to my teenager or my younger self would be, don't wait until you're ready. I think sometimes we are held back by the fear of the unknown, by the fear of, trying to get something perfect when it's already good enough, etc. If I think developments in recent months and years globally have shown us, I think that, if you have a mission that is about social impact, and it's about social impact for children, and if you know, as we do, that, every hour, every day, every week, every month that we are slow, that is systems change in children whose lives are not being positively impacted, we should have a real sense of urgency. Now, you have to couple that with rigor and evidence and all of those good things. But I think something about not waiting until you're ready, because I think there have been times in my career, things I've been working on, initiatives, projects, programs, when, maybe we've been a little hesitant, maybe we've gone a little slower than we might have done. But if you're prepared to couple the don't wait until you're ready with the, acknowledgement that you'll get something's wrong, and so long as they're not having a significant negative impact on anybody, but you learn quickly and you adjust as you go, and that mentality of act, learn, adjust, act, that's what I think tell my younger self.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my reflections on where you see executive teams and boards of trustees that are united on that type of approach, or the types of organisations that, when there are, like you say, there's tipping points in every few years, isn't there, or new challenges that come along, those are the organisations that can move quickly, can change, can have the impact that it requires, and ultimately make the most difference, which is why any of us are doing any of what we're doing, working and serving within the charity sector. So no, that's great insight and really, really helpful. Howard, I'm so incredibly grateful for you coming on the podcast. I think with all of these shows, I always feel like we could probably talk for hours, but the snapshot that you've given us in 45 minutes has been brilliant. And we encourage the listeners to go away to have a look at the Lumos website to delve into the 20th anniversary celebrations and look at the videos, get as much information they can, and support the work. So we encourage people to go and do that. And thank you again, Howard, for making time for us today.
Adam, thanks for having me. And more than that, thanks for what you're doing. I think the work you're doing with this series and, getting beneath the sort of headlines and demystifying, hopefully for listeners, some of what the organizations are up to, but also what it takes to lead them, and the complexity and what we're all trying to do to deliver positive social impact at scale. So thanks for having me, and thanks for what you do as well. Yeah, well, no, you're very welcome. And great to have you on the show. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Charity Changemakers Podcast. I hope you've been inspired by the incredible work being done across the charity sector. And this episode is proudly brought to you by my business, Charisma Charity Recruitment. We are passionate about delivering top-tier recruitment services to the charity sector that we care so much about. If your organisation is looking for expert support, then we'd love to help. Please do get in touch today. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe, like and share, because it helps us reach more people and showcase the amazing charities that come on the show. And for more episodes, please visit our website, charismarecruitment.co.uk. So until next time, keep change making.